The envelope was already sealed when Marcus Holt slid it across the kitchen table. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind that smells like old coffee and finality, and Diane didn't look at him when she picked it up. She already knew what was inside. She had drafted the language herself 3 weeks earlier, sitting in her car in the parking lot of a Walgreens at 11 p.m. because she couldn't bring herself to type the words inside their apartment. Irreconcilable differences. That was what the lawyer had called it. A clean phrase for a messy truth. Marcus watched her fingers press flat against the envelope, watched her exhale slowly through her nose, and he said nothing. He could have said everything. He had the words. He had the numbers. He had 17 missed calls from his CFO, sitting unread on the burner phone in the inside pocket of the secondhand jacket he wore every day, so that no one, not the neighbors, not the corner store clerk, not even Diane, would ever look at him and see what he actually was. He said nothing. He let her go. And the question that would haunt every single person who later learned the full truth of what Marcus Holt was worth was this. Why? The answer was not simple. It never is with men like Marcus. The offices of Callaway and Vance Property Group occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower on the corner of 5th and Meridian, and on any given morning, the lobby smelled like cold marble, expensive cologne, and ambition that had curdled just slightly at the edges. The security desk was manned by a rotating cast of guards who all shared the same tired eyes and the same practiced invisibility. People learned quickly in lobbies like this one that the less you were noticed, the longer you kept your job. Marcus arrived at 7:14 a.m., the same time he arrived every morning. He wore a gray janitor's uniform faded at the elbows with the name Ray embroidered in yellow thread above the left breast pocket. The name wasn't his. The uniform had belonged to a man named Raymond Castillo, who'd retired from the building 2 years earlier, and Marcus had quietly arranged to keep using it because Ray was the kind of name that made people's eyes slide right past you. He pushed a cleaning cart that squeaked on its left front wheel, a squeak he had never fixed because the squeak made people move away from him in the elevator, and he preferred the silence. His shoes were worn at the heel. His hands, when he gripped the cart's handle, were rough in the way that hands get rough when they have known real work. Not the soft roughness of a man performing humility, but the earned roughness of someone who had once loaded trucks at 4 a.m. for $9 an hour just to keep a roof over a mother who couldn't remember his name anymore. He took the service elevator to the 14th floor. The carpet up here was thick and charcoal gray, and the hallway smelled of leather chairs and filtered air. The Callaway and Vance leasing department occupied the entire floor, and by 7:30 the first employees would begin to arrive, junior agents in sharp suits carrying coffee cups like shields, assistants moving fast with tablets pressed to their chests. And eventually, at precisely 8 a.m., the floor's director, a man named Preston Vance Jr., who was the son of the firm's co-founder, and who carried that fact like a weapon he was always on the verge of drawing. Marcus pushed his cart to the far end of the hallway and began to clean. This was what he did. He wiped surfaces, emptied bins, replaced water cooler jugs, straightened chairs in the conference room. He had been doing it, in various buildings and under various pretenses, for 3 years. It was how he learned. It was how he had always learned, by becoming invisible in rooms where powerful people forgot to perform, where the masks slipped and the real machinery of a place revealed itself in unguarded moments. He had bought his first warehouse at 26 years old using money he'd saved while working 3 jobs. And he had built what followed by understanding people better than they understood themselves. The disguise was not a game. It was a philosophy. He was polishing the glass partition near the leasing floor's main entrance when the first agents arrived. He noted their energy. Tense, careful, the kind of carefully managed body language that meant someone important was expected, and everyone was quietly terrified. Then she walked in. Her name was Sola Adeyemi, and she was 29 minutes early for her first day. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse, and her shoes Marcus noticed because he noticed everything was slightly scuffed at the toe in the way that shoes get when they are good shoes that have been worn too many times because replacing them is not currently possible. She carried a folder, not a tablet, not a leather portfolio, but an actual manila folder with a clear plastic cover, inside which Marcus could see Even from across the hallway, a printed copy of her portfolio, a reference letter, and what looked like a hand-drawn floor plan with annotations in the margins. She had prepared. She had over-prepared. And she stood at the reception desk with her folder pressed to her chest and her chin level and her eyes doing the quiet calculation that eyes do when a person is running numbers in their head. Am I early enough? Is this the right floor? Did I wear the right thing? Marcus kept polishing. The receptionist, a young woman named Bree, who wore her professionalism like a costume 2 sizes too large, told Sola that she could wait on the bench near the window. Sola thanked her. She sat. She did not take out her phone. She looked out at the city, and Marcus, from his position behind the glass partition, watched her face settle into something that was not quite calm, but was trying very hard to be. He had seen that face before. He had made that face before. Sitting outside a bank manager's office at 23, holding a business plan in a manila folder not so different from hers, actually, and telling himself that whatever happened in the next 30 minutes was not going to break him. Even if it did. He looked away. He kept cleaning. At 8:02, Preston Vance Jr. arrived. He was 41 years old, taller than necessary, and had the kind of face that was photographed well and trusted poorly. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Sola's monthly rent and carried himself with the specific confidence of a man who had never once been told, in any room that mattered, that he was wrong. His assistant was a young man named Felix who walked 2 steps behind him at all times and whose jaw was permanently set in the expression of someone absorbing a blow they had been trained not to react to, held the elevator door as Preston stepped out. Preston scanned the floor the way men like him always scanned rooms, quickly, efficiently, cataloging the hierarchy. His eyes landed on Sola. He did not greet her. He turned to Bree. "Who's that?" Bree explained. "New agent. Starting today." Referred by the Meridian office. Preston looked at Sola the way people look at furniture they aren't sure they want. Then he walked past her without a word, paused, turned back, and said loudly, the way people speak when they want to be overheard, "Felix, remind me, did we approve a headcount for another junior agent this quarter?" Felix said quietly that yes. HR had approved the position in March. Preston said, in a tone that implied the decision had been made without sufficient input from someone sufficiently important, and walked into his office. Sola did not flinch, but her hand, Marcus noticed, pressed just slightly harder against the folder in her lap. Marcus moved his cart 6 feet to the left and began on the next section of glass. Sola's first 3 weeks at Callaway and Vance were a masterclass in institutional indifference. She was assigned a desk in the back corner of the leasing floor near the printer that everyone complained about and no one fixed. She was given a list of leads that the senior agents had already worked and abandoned, not because they were bad leads, but because they were the kind of leads that required patience and effort that the senior agents didn't need to offer when the commissions from their existing clients kept their numbers comfortable. Sola worked for them anyway. She called back. She followed up. She drove to properties on Saturday mornings in her scuffed shoes and her navy blazer and walked clients through units with the specificity of someone who had studied every detail of every listing and the warmth of someone who genuinely wanted these people to find the right home. Her manager, a woman named Candace, who was kind in a careful, limited way, told her privately, after week 2, that her numbers were already among the best on the floor for new agents. Sola thanked her and asked if she might be considered for the Northgate portfolio when it opened up a cluster of mid-market residential properties that Sola had identified from public records as significantly underpriced relative to a coming rezoning decision. Candace said she would mention it. She didn't. The Northgate portfolio was quietly handed on a Friday afternoon to a senior agent named Derek who golfed with Preston and whose quarterly numbers had been declining for 8 months. Sola found out on Monday. She said nothing. She went back to her leads. Marcus, pushing his cart past her desk at 7:30 that Monday morning, watched her stare at the printed Northgate listing on her screen for exactly 11 seconds before she closed the tab, opened a new one, and began to work. He had been watching her for 3 weeks. He had seen her stay until 9 p.m. on 3 consecutive Thursdays, eating a sandwich at her desk because she'd told a client she would have the comparative analysis ready by morning. He had seen Preston walk past her desk 4 times without making eye contact. the studied non-acknowledgement of a man who had decided, without evidence and without inquiry, that she was not worth his attention. He had seen Felix, who was the kind of person the building quietly rooted to slip her a list of vendor contacts one afternoon with the guilty speed of someone passing a note in class. And he had seen the folder. It sat in the bottom drawer of her desk, which she thought she closed fully each morning, but which caught on a small warp in the runner and always stayed open just enough that Marcus, emptying her bin each morning, could see the tab label she had written in her own handwriting. Ellison Community Housing Project. He knew what that was. He had read about it in a planning document 3 months ago. A proposed affordable housing development on the city's east side, a project that required private partnership funding, had stalled twice for lack of a champion, and that would, if built, provide 340 units to families currently on a waiting list that stretched 4 years long. Sola Adeyemi was building a proposal for it, on her own time, with no instruction and no guarantee of anything. Marcus said nothing. He emptied the bin. He moved his cart. The left front wheels squeaked. It was on a Wednesday in her 5th week that Sola overheard the conversation that changed everything. She had come back to the floor at 8:47 p.m. to retrieve her phone charger. The lights were on the automated dimmer at that hour, casting the open floor in a flat, tired glow. She thought she was alone. She was almost to her desk when she heard Preston's voice from behind the half-open door of the corner conference room. The room with the long table and the city view that junior agents were not permitted to book. She stopped, not to eavesdrop. She stopped because the voice that answered Preston was one she recognized immediately, instinctively, in the specific way that the body knows something before the mind has caught up. It was the voice of her husband. His name was Julian Croft, and Sola had married him 14 months ago in a ceremony at her aunt's house with 30 people and a rented arch of white flowers. Julian was charming in the specific way that men are charming when they have learned very precisely which version of themselves each person in the room needs to see. He was a commercial real estate broker, which was how he and Sola had met at an industry mixer 18 months before the wedding, and he had from the beginning encouraged her career with the enthusiasm of a man who understood that a wife who earned well and believed in her own capability was easier to manage than one who didn't. He was also, as Sola was about to learn, Preston Vance Jr.'s silent partner in something that was not entirely legal. She stood in the shadows outside the conference room door, and she listened. The plan was specific, and it was cold. The Ellison Community Housing site, the land, the opportunity, the need, was about to be quietly purchased through a shell company that Julian and Preston had structured together. The purchase would happen at below market rate through a zoning variance Preston had already arranged with a city official whose name was mentioned once and then not again. The affordable housing project would be shelved. The land would be flipped within 18 months for luxury development at a margin that, based on the numbers Preston was quoting, was somewhere north of $40 million. 340 families. 4-year waiting. List. Gone. Sola's hand was on the wall. She could feel the plaster cool against her palm. Her breath had gone very shallow, and she was doing what she always did in moments of crisis. She was calculating. Not the money. Not the risk. She was calculating the specific weight of a decision that had no good side. If she said nothing, she would know. She would come to work every day and sit at her desk beneath the fluorescent light and know. She would go home to Julian and know. She would see his face across the dinner table and know. And if she said something, if she took what she had just heard and did something with it, she would lose her job. Certainly, she would lose her marriage. She might, depending on how this unfolded, find herself on the wrong end of a very expensive legal response from people who had very expensive lawyers. She had $4,200 in her personal savings account. She had a mother in Lagos whose medical bills she paid every month $380 for blood pressure medication and a quarterly cardiology review because her mother's heart had been doing something irregular since 2019, and the alternative to the monthly payment was a conversation Sola was not prepared to have. She had the Ellison folder in her bottom drawer. She had 30 people at her wedding and a rented arch of white flowers and a husband whose voice, right now, through a half-open door, sounded like a stranger's. She took her phone charger. She walked to the elevator. She did not make a sound. Felix knew. He had known for 2 weeks, which was approximately how long he had been accidentally included on a misdirected email chain before someone noticed and removed him. He had a wife who was 7 months pregnant. He had a work visa that was sponsored by Callaway and Vance. He had, in the specific arithmetic of his situation, exactly 0 margin for error and exactly one person, Preston Vance Jr., who held the paperwork that kept him in the country where his child was about to be born. He had read the email chain 3 times, then deleted it, then lain awake 4 nights in a row, reconstructing it from memory and trying to find a version of events in which what he had read was not what it appeared to be. He had not found that version. He had also noticed Sola's folder. He had walked past her desk enough times to read the tab. He had watched her stay late, watched her work the bad leads, watched Preston not look at her, and he had done what frightened, cornered people do when they know something they cannot afford to say. He had been a little extra kind to her in the small ways that cost nothing: the vendor list, a heads up about a difficult client's preferences, a held elevator door. It was not enough. He knew that. He held it anyway because it was all he could hold. On a Thursday morning, 11 days after she had stood outside the conference room door, Sola walked into Preston Vance Jr.'s office and placed a formal written complaint on his desk. She had spent those 11 days being very careful and very quiet. She had documented what she had heard with specific language, no embellishment, times and dates, and direct quotes reproduced as accurately as her memory allowed. She had made a copy. She had sent a copy, sealed, to the city's housing development office, addressed to the department head. She had spent one evening on the phone with a legal aid service, which had told her, in measured terms, that what she was describing could constitute fraud, and that she would need, at minimum, corroborating evidence to make anything stick. She did not have corroborating evidence. She had her word and a folder of publicly available research and the memory of a voice through a half-open door. She put the complaint on his desk anyway. Preston read it. His face did not move. He put it down. He looked at her with the patient, almost sorrowful expression of a man explaining something to someone he has already decided is not worth his time. "I'm going to give you the opportunity," he said quietly, "to reconsider whether this is the path you want to take." Sola said she had already considered it. 3 hours later, Preston called a floor meeting. 22 agents and support staff gathered in the open area near the window. Preston stood at the front, jacket buttoned, voice level, and informed the floor that an investigation had been opened into the conduct of one of their newest agents, specifically allegations of unauthorized access to confidential client files and the misrepresentation of qualifications in her initial hiring documentation. Every face on that floor turned to look at Sola. She stood very still. The folder from her bottom drawer had been placed, she noticed, on top of her desk, not inside it so that everyone could see it, so that it looked like evidence of something. No one spoke in her defense. Not Candace, who looked at the floor. Not Derek, who looked at his phone. Not Felix, who stood at the back of the group with his hands clasped and his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above Sola's head, and whose jaw was doing the thing it did when he was absorbing something he had trained himself not to react to. Sola looked at the room. She looked at 22 people doing the math, their jobs, their mortgages, their own manila folders of ambition and choosing, in the particular silence of that moment, to do nothing. Then she looked at the man in the janitor's uniform at the far end of the room who had stopped pushing his cart. There was something she had noticed about him. She had been trying to place it for weeks. It was his hands specifically, the way he held his phone. On the 3 occasions she had seen him glance at it quickly while passing through the floor. It was not the casual glance of someone checking a message. It was the brief, practiced check of someone managing something, the same micro-expression she had seen on the faces of senior partners at the industry mixers, the ones who were running 4 things at once and had learned to make it invisible. Ray the janitor looked at his phone the way CEOs looked at their phones when they thought no one was watching. She had filed the observation away. She filed everything away. It was how she had survived every room she had ever been in that was not designed for her. Now, standing in the silence of that floor meeting, Sola looked at the man in the gray uniform, and she saw clearly not the answer, but the specific quality of his attention. He was watching Preston, not the way an employee watches a superior, the way an investor watches a company he is reconsidering. Preston was still talking, something about trust and professional standards and the necessity of protecting the firm's clients. Sola stopped listening. She reached into the folder on her desk, the one that had been moved, and she removed a single document. It was the Ellison proposal, not the full version, just the first page, which contained the site details and a paragraph she had written summarizing the public need. She held it up. "Before you finish," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected, "I'd like to ask whether anyone in this room has heard of the Ellison Community Housing Project, because the land it's planned for is about to be purchased, and I think some people in this firm know exactly who." The room was very quiet. Preston looked at her the way predators look at something that has just done something unexpected. "That's enough," he said. "I have a recording," Sola said. She did not have a recording. She had said it because she had nothing else left to say, and because the truth, spoken into silence, sometimes behaves like evidence even when it isn't. It didn't matter. Preston's face did something complicated, a brief, almost imperceptible shift. The kind of shift that happens when someone runs a very fast calculation and arrives at a number they don't like, and then he straightened and said with complete composure that Sola's employment was terminated effective immediately and that security would escort her from the building. And then, from the far side of the room, the janitor's cart stopped squeaking. The man who stood up from behind the cart was not Raymond Castillo. He was 6'1", and when he straightened, something in the quality of the room's air changed in the way that it changes when the actual weight of a person is finally allowed to occupy space. Marcus Holt removed the gray cap. He put his phone, not the burner, the real one, on the nearest desk and turned the screen to face the room. It showed a live call. The call had been running for 47 minutes. On the other end was his chief legal officer, his head of compliance, and a representative from the city's housing authority, all of whom had been listening since Marcus had dialed out, silently, while Sola was placing her complaint on Preston's desk that morning. "I've heard enough," Marcus said. His voice was quiet. It had always been quiet. The loudest rooms he had ever walked into had been made loud by men like Preston, and Marcus had long ago learned that real authority does not raise its volume. Preston Vance Jr. stared at the man in the janitor's uniform, and his face did the three things it was about to do in sequence. It denied, it deflected, it began to collapse. "I don't know who you think you are," Preston said. "You know exactly who I am," Marcus said. "You've been trying to buy my air rights on the Meridian parcel for 14 months. Your broker is standing in the back of the room." Felix made a sound that was not quite a word. Every face turned to Felix. Felix looked at the floor for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked up. "I have the email chain," Felix said. His voice shook slightly. "I deleted it, but I have the content. I can reconstruct it. And I'm prepared to do that." Preston said Felix's name in the tone of someone pulling a pin they didn't realize was already out. Felix said, "My wife is having our baby in 6 weeks. She was born here. My child will be born here. I'm not going to let my child grow up in a country where I stayed silent about this." The room had stopped breathing. Preston denied it was a misunderstanding. The project details were preliminary. Nothing had been finalized. He tried deflection. Sola's complaint was still a matter for HR, separate from any project discussion. He tried, finally, something almost resembling appeal, looking around the room for the face of anyone who might still be calculating in his favor. He found none. They were alone in the conference room afterward. The long table, the city view, the two of them, and a cooling cup of coffee that no one had touched. Marcus had changed out of the uniform. He wore a plain white shirt and dark trousers. He looked, Sola thought, like someone who had recently put something down that he had been carrying for a very long time. "You didn't have a recording," he said. It was not a question. "No," Sola said. He nodded slowly. "What did you have?" "The truth," she said. "And a folder, and the belief that if I stayed quiet, I would eventually become someone I didn't recognize." Marcus looked at the city through the glass, somewhere out on the east side, on a parcel of land that was not going to be quietly flipped for $40 million. There were 340 families who didn't yet know that a woman with a scuffed shoe and a manila folder had just changed something fundamental about their next 4 years. "I let my ex-wife go," Marcus said, "because I believed she deserved to choose freely. She didn't know about any of this." He gestured at the room, the building, the invisible empire that the gray uniform had covered. I wanted to know if who I was without the number was enough. It wasn't. Or she decided it wasn't. I'm still not sure which. Sola said nothing. She waited. I want to fund the Ellison project, Marcus said. Full partnership. Your name on the proposal as lead developer. Sola looked at the folder on the table between them. She had spent 4 months building what was inside it. There's a condition, she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The management contracts go to residents. The people who will live there manage the maintenance, the community programs, the decisions about the space, not external contractors, not an asset management firm with its name on a plaque. She paused. People take care of things they own a piece of. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know someone who used to load trucks at 4 a.m. who would agree with that entirely. 6 months later, the Ellison Community Housing Project broke ground on a Tuesday morning. Sola stood at the edge of the site in a hard hat that was slightly too large for her, watching a child from the neighborhood across the chain-link fence stand on the lowest rung to see over. Felix, whose visa had been transferred to a different sponsoring organization and whose daughter had been born 8 pounds and fully healthy in the 3rd week of November, stood beside her. He had brought coffee. He had brought enough for everyone. In the corner of the Callaway and Vance leasing floor, which was under new management, with new values posted in the lobby that someone had actually been asked to write rather than copy from a template, there was an empty desk that had been left deliberately as it was, bottom drawer slightly open, a tab visible in handwritten letters, Ellison, Community Housing Project. No one had been asked to leave it. Someone just had. And in the city, in a building whose name most people didn't know, and whose ownership was not discussed in the kinds of rooms where such things are usually discussed. Marcus Holt put on a gray jacket that morning. Not the uniform, just a jacket, worn at the elbows, and took the service elevator down. Not because he had to, because some ways of moving through the world, once learned in the years when they were the only option, become the truest version of who you are. He walked out Tuesday morning. The city smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. He had nowhere specific to be.